There is some truth in those that bet big, win big.
I don't think you should be doing too much gambling tonight, Alan.
Gambling? Who said anything about gambling? It's not gambling when you know you're going to win.
But also that can come at a cost. But when we do get a win, shout it from the goddamn rooftop.
The number one question I ask is, would anyone care about this? Would I care about this?
I think about this a lot on the subway. I'll see ad after ad after ad, and I'll analyse them, and 90% of them are
Whenever we create a piece of social content, we'll do the mobile phone test. I'll actually stand a few feet back and ask, can I read this? Can I understand it? Is it legible? And you should just assume that people have a fraction of the time. And one thing I've learned is that
in this week's Memes and Machines, we focused in on creativity, starting with the aftermath of the Super Bowl and why Coinbase have delivered some exceptional reactive marketing. We talk about reactive content. How do you become a reactive brand? Is this type of marketing tactic reserved for big brands, or can smaller brands play in this space? We unpick all of that. We dive into luxury fashion. Loro Piana. Why are they now partnering with comedy, sketch, TikTok creators who mock their brand, and they're also reaping the rewards? We dive into the often overlooked or misunderstood aspects of advertising, context, placement, layers. What are the other paradigms you need to think about when you're coming up with your creativity? And finally, we share our big mistakes, our confessions, the things that we're maybe not so proud of. Cartman, good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well, my friend. How are you doing? What's new in the world of LV Chef?
Oh, so much. Too much. I'm liking your hat, by the way.
Thank you. It's actually my girlfriend's uncle's hat. So.
Even better, a hat with a story.
Mate, everything becomes cool again one day. That's what you learn from that.
You can't get better than that. Dude, we'll dive right in this week. So, when we were reviewing Super Bowl ads, one of the creatives that we gave a special mention to was Liquid Death. And their less obvious, quite irreverent take on the Super Bowl. And for anyone that hasn't seen, Liquid Death came out and did an eBay listing whereby you could, as a brand, as an individual, you could advertise on their packaging, and the messaging they tried to portray was that they have more distribution than the Super Bowl. They will reach more people. Genius for a number of reasons. It was attached to a part of the Super Bowl which is maybe less congested and less contested, which is advertising in the overall narrative. It's very smart to try and get someone else to pay for your advertising. Great. The mechanic was social first and obviously had all the ability to earn attention by doing it through an eBay listing. Again, a little hook. And I just think the combination of that and other factors meant it was great. Anyway, it transpires that the winning bidder spent $500,000 going directly into Liquid Death's marketing pot, and the winning bidder was Coinbase. What do you think about it? Was that bang for buck for Coinbase? Give us your thoughts.
Look, I think it helps, the crypto markets recovered nicely. Bitcoin's, close to all-time highs. So Coinbase probably had a little bit more leeway, let's just say, than usual when it came to their marketing budget for this year. It is a really interesting thought experiment, right? Like who got the better deal? $500,000 for exposure to every single one of Liquid Death's, customers and people who walk past them, or $6 million on a Super Bowl ad. And I think if you did the maths, I'd say their CPMs were probably much lower than a Super Bowl ad, so they probably won there. If they get the creative right, and I think that's the next stage of this, right? Like what is going to go on the box? if they get that right, then they'll probably be way in the clear. I do think with the Super Bowl ad, you still have that kind of, the cultural significance of the Super Bowl. You have that moment in time that you get to really capture, but it sounds to me like a pretty good deal on the surface. And for me, it's all about, what is the killer piece of creative or the killer piece of copy that isn't just going to get people to stop and look, but it's going to get them to take a picture, share it on socials. What is the way they can really take this to the next level? And I'm a big fan of Coinbase's creative team. I'm sure they've got some great firepower in them.
Yeah, and they had quite a clever reaction response, right? What did they write on on their response?
So they tweeted that they were the purchasers of the $500,000 ad, and basically said, we paid this, we're going to pay for this in crypto. And as a result, you are going to save, Liquid Death are going to save $13,000 in fees. And so it's a really brilliant way to kind of tie the whole thing immediately back to what is a core company value, and what is not just a value of their company, but a value of their, the whole industry, crypto as a whole. And so even there, it's a nice little win. They've really thought about, like, why are we in a position to make this purchase, and how do they make sure that it links back to a very clear company value product.
Yeah, I love it. I thought it was very smart. I think it's also part of a bigger story, which we seem to see more and more. Brand crossovers, unlikely bedfellows coming together. We used to call this in social media branter, little play on British banter. But fundamentally, it's reactionary content where brands are working together to earn more attention. They're joining trends, themes, they're engaging. I suppose question for you is, do you rate this type of tactic? And how do you become a truly reactive brand? What are the steps you have to take if you want that to be part of your marketing playbook?
Yeah, well, I think there's two kinds of these kind of crossovers, right? The first we're seeing, like you said, is these kind of reactionary moments. How do we as a brand, make use of another event that's happening, another brand that's like really in the spotlight? But actually the more interesting trend we're seeing is these kind of deeper integrations, these deeper partnerships. It's very rare that you see, two brands really work side by side or appear next to each other in marketing. I remember Tide, the kind of laundry detergent, a few years ago in the Super Bowl, really kind of took this to the next level, where they appeared in 5 or 6 other brands' creatives and really kind of owned the Super Bowl marketing that year. It was the first time I'd really seen this, like, a brand actually appearing in or working with completely unrelated at times, but in some way kind of parallel brands. And I think we're now seeing it more and more, where I think a lot of these brands are taking a leaf out of fashion's book, right? In fashion, this kind of like collaboration culture that we're seeing is very, very prominent, not just with 2 fashion brands, but with brands that just have that cultural significance. That the Barbie moment last year was a big one, where every single fashion brand was partnering with them, and I think that was a real kind of flag in the sand there. But yeah, as a brand, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to be, you have to have cultural clout, right? Because these brands aren't just working with anyone that knocks on the door. They're carefully selecting the kind of brands that they think are going to have that natural, brand equity, that natural kind of impressions uplift. But you also just have to position yourself to maybe not take yourself as seriously as you used to. There's a lot of, having worked with a lot of brands myself, you sometimes get these like brand guidelines, these brand books that are incredibly strict. They're incredibly, granular as to how their brand can show up and how their brand can be used. But I think what we're seeing now is a general relaxation of these rules, these kind of arbitrary laws that say, actually, our logo can appear here, or our logo can appear next to a brand that maybe isn't as connected, but we know it's going to, get us in front of more people.
Yeah. I agree with most of that. Where I would maybe contest is the part around, let's say, the cultural leverage that a big company, a McDonald's, an Uber, something that is now part of the vernacular. I've actually, some of the more impressive brand to moments for me of where a seemingly small company has either been a first mover, put something out in the world and kind of led that interaction, I came
Yes,
across a HR platform, a social media SaaS platform, not a big company. And I looked through the comments and reactions, and they did just the most social first viral post, jumped on. I don't know if you've seen that, basically that CapCut template, which is like a dog and some cheesy like synth music, and the dog's just nodding left and right. And then you just overlay a meme, right? A caption. And one of them was just something about a people function or social media managers. And I'd never heard of this company before. Obviously, I'm a buyer of social media software running an agency business. And I thought, great, I'm now aware of you. When I looked in the comments on something that I just discovered on my feed, you had Microsoft engaging with them, HubSpot. And I just go, all credit to you. That one piece of content, you probably have no cultural relevance in the sense that you don't hold that cultural weight in the world, yet you were still able to cut through and garner the attention of some of the world's biggest companies. There is a second point, adjacent point, where I do agree with you, is this relaxation or the death of the brand guidelines. And I'd actually say you could argue there is a cost to that, and there is some downside because I believe it's much easier to get cheap thrills and, you know, have people engage and certainly reach more people through your organic social content. But at what cost? I'm seeing more and more. We had a conversation with a big sporting brand, and they're really keen on injecting humor into their personality. And us as a partner, we're supposed to be objective, right? And for me, I go, there's a place for humor or the more playful side of the brand, but you're not a playful brand. So for me, like leaning all in and kind of following the crowd and, you know, putting humor front and center of your tone of voice, I do think it's potentially going to lead everybody down this kind of read the same rule book, do the same thing. And I don't know how I feel about that personally.
Yeah, it also means that you are sacrificing other parts of your brand personality. You can't be everything, right? So like if you want to have the element of authority or seriousness, but you're also, you know, posting dumb memes, it is difficult to then kind of have that personality or that respect that somebody might give you if you only posted serious, educational, whatever it might be. And so, yeah, you're right. Like I think there's going to be a lot of this kind of humor, you know, Duolingo driven social media strategies, which might actually do a lot of, you know, damage in the long term to these brands.
Yeah. My number one rule for every organization, and I think it's going to become increasingly important as content gets more congested, we could argue more competitive, the standards are going to be raised because more and more brands find it easier. Small companies, big companies, individuals can create more content much more cost efficiently. I just think the number one rule every company has to respect is knowing themselves, being self-aware. And yes, you know, if you think about you and me, we have different sides to our personality. We're not one thing. Sometimes we have a little play and we're, you know, willing to have some fun. Sometimes we're serious, right? Serious Catman. I have seen you doing the Millie Rock in a kebab shop in New York City at 3 a.m. That's a side of you that not everybody sees.
Yeah. Only the select few, only the very lucky. Hey, look, you're going to have to tell me where there's a kebab shop in New York City. I think you've...
You know what I mean. You know what? I don't know if I told you this, but I created a folder in my phone. So I'm quite organized when I need to be. And this folder contains what I'm going to call catty memes. So it's literally compromising shots of you either doing things you're not supposed to or extremely drunk. One of those two spectrums. All in a folder. And I've started to make them into stickers. We have GIFs.
Amazing.
So one day, if this podcast ever reaches its potential heights, I'm going to finish you. I am going to finish you.
You're going to ruin my brand. Ruin my brand equity.
But back to point, dude. knowing yourself, number one tip for me. And then I think everything from there is two things can be true. I think there's a role for brand guidelines once you know yourself and creating structure and those kind of identifiers, whether it's your sound, it's your tone of voice, it's your visual, it's your color palette, it's your partnerships, who you're willing to associate. There's so many levels to this. But I think you can put guardrails around what you do from marketing. And you can also leave space to play. And space to play can mean a platform. I'm a big believer that there are probably, the more unhinged version of your company and brand can exist somewhere, right, on the internet. So you might find those spaces. But again, I think it starts with knowing yourself, then finding and having a clear channel strategy of where those spaces to show that side of you. And then it's more about not being blinded or not being, not being crippled by perfection. I think it's critical then, if you really want to play in those spaces, you kind of just have to take the risk sometime. I remember a quote that you told me that I think's always, it's kind of followed my career, and it may have been the one of the CMOs of the fast food giants, where they talked about social media teams. Effectively, now we have entered an age of marketing where we have to deploy more trust in our social teams than any other time in history. And by proxy, when I say social teams, I just mean anyone who touches social media as a brand, these guardians. And I think that's we've seen that almost supercharged today.
Yeah, I think it was the Wendy's CMO who at the time, they really led the kind of irreverent, humor-led content, and exactly that. There's a level of trust that you're trusting team members who probably aren't super close to a senior level at this time anyway, and you're having to say to them, because they understand the social tone of voice better than the executives ever will. And so you got to give this kind of like unparalleled level of trust to them. And yeah, those that do seem to win.
Couldn't agree more. Talking of being irreverent, there's a luxury brand called Loro Piana. And hopefully my thick Barnsley accent didn't ruin that. Very prestigious luxury brand. I got that right, didn't I?
I think you got that right. Even if you got it right, you've still kind of taken some prestige away from it. But
wow. Well, I will tell you, Loro Piana produce very expensive, let's say basics, t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, trainers, shoes, but very luxury, premium, reserved for the elite in the world. The 0.00001% of people can probably afford them. And what I found really interesting, there is a creator online that made his name through doing comedy sketches, pretending to be a high net worth individual and just mocking really rich people. And what I love about it is he made Loro Piana part of his sketch. So he integrated it. And what they've gone and done is they've listened, and instead of doing what most prestigious brands do, they ignore and kind of maybe file a lawsuit or do something of that nature. They went, you know what? We're going to work with this guy. So they had a partnership where they continue to show new collections, and now it just authentically integrates into this cult personality that he's created. And interestingly enough, when you look at the data, basically since this creator started promoting them, they've had a huge surge in popularity amongst younger people. It's predominantly TikTok. They've had way more search terms on Google. If you look at the volume of search terms, so people are actually curious about the brand. And all of this coincides with this comedy creator that started off by mocking them, that is now getting paid to promote them. I love this story. What do you think this means for premium brands? And is this kind of the final nail in the coffin of what we mentioned, brand guidelines?
I think what's more interesting about a brand like Loro Piana is that, like we said, they've always really lent into not doing much marketing. They kind of let their products do the talking. They have this prestige, and that kind of they're so high, so high level in kind of like their luxury status. What's that quote? Money shouts, wealth whispers, I think is how you'd kind of sum up what they've tried to do. And I think this is kind of really going in a different direction completely, where they're listening to the kind of word on the street. They're finding creators who are interacting with them, and they're leaning heavily into that. I think it's a good lesson in, looking to the kind of hive mind of the creators who are on social, on these platforms, to lead you in a lot of your messaging and lead you in a lot of your marketing. I think a lot about how, we've kind of already mentioned them at Duolingo, how they've built a whole kind of new playbook for their marketing based on a meme, right, that somebody else posted. So people used to post the memes about how the Duolingo owl notifications are kind of scary. They're a little bit, intrusive. And then as a result, there were people making these memes about how the owl is going to, come up to your house. He's going to, chase you around. And they listened to that. They saw that it resonated with people, and they lent in so heavily that their whole playbook is now around this kind of absurd, unhinged personality. And we're seeing that out now with other brands like Loro Piana, who are listening to how other people talk about that brand and then leaning heavily into that and going in that direction. And it's almost, taking the burden of having to do that creative thinking away from them and almost let the audience, let the creators do the talking for you.
Yeah. It reminds me of what we were discussing before around spaces. Like, marketeers often have to weigh up positive impact and negative impact of every decision we make. And we don't always get that balance right. There is some truth in those that bet big, win big, but also that can come at a cost. And if I think of kind of the typical customer that can probably afford this brand, they're probably elderly, much older. I'd imagine the average age is, at least your age, Catman, at least. But what they have done through this type of, I suppose, partnership and collaboration is they've found a way to just connect with young people in a way that they probably never would have. They can still preserve the heritage, and they can still create the same shop experience, and they can still have the partnerships with Vogue or whatever was in their typical marketing calendar. But they have found a space where they can make this work for them. And I massively respect it. And I think two things can be true. We are seeing not the death of the brand guidelines, because I think guardrails are important to keep companies focused. Otherwise, you end up being at the mercy of like CEOs. I was having a conversation with a brand this week, big brand. These were leaders of the region for a global brand. And they were like, we have a marketing strategy, we have a social strategy, we have a set of goals, and we're now no longer allowed to see that play out because, the CEO looks at a competitor and says, hey, we should be doing this. But no, CEO, we just agreed that we were going to do this, and we've got to see the strategy play out. And there's now this impatience. And I think it's quite maybe a unique problem that social media teams have specifically as the shop window into that brand. So I don't see every Nike placement in the world around advertising, but I can look at their social media and I can see how other people are talking about them on LinkedIn, etc., etc. And that's kind of unique in the sense that I don't see all the out of home, and I don't see all the magazine placements, and I don't see the TV ad that happens in one country somewhere that I don't watch TV. So I do think it's a unique problem. And my view and what I've kind of learned probably through experience, but in part observing, is the social teams that earn the authority to maybe deliver on their mandate, it's usually predicated on like having a little success, Duolingo being one, and then like repeating that process. And eventually, if you can win those little business cases, as I would call them, time and time again. You earn respect, authority to try more and more things. And then eventually you are this guarded thing within an organization that's championed in a way that you maybe don't. And part of the brief in this conversation with this business is, how do we help them level set for across senior stakeholders? And how do we help them effectively as a marketing function execute on a strategy? So it's actually quite a unique challenge, and it's something that we're thinking about present of how do we help brands through that. From your experience, what are your top tips for kind of staying focused on a marketing plan? You may have the same challenges in Third Web. I don't know, is there moments where you've kind of got a lot of voices wanting to do stuff and you have to steer the ship in a certain way?
Yeah, it's funny when you're describing all that. I remember there was like a period in time where a lot of big brands were testing out having like localized channels, right? So you'd have like, one brand would have a channel for the UK, for France, for Germany, for the US, and it was just a nightmare to kind of keep up. And I think at some point, I think everyone decided this is just a waste of time, and let's like concentrate our efforts onto one channel. But you're right; it's very difficult. That the social channels are arguably the most important focus, because, like you said, if I visit a brand page in France, it's the same page that I'm seeing everywhere else. If I do the same in the UK, but if I'm doing marketing elsewhere on TV or on billboards, I can choose very specifically what my placements are. So I have this ability to craft different personalities and voices for different markets, for different contexts. Whereas, like you said, social is just all out there. It's a really interesting topic, I think, as well. Like, it's easier for a brand like us, like Third Web, because we are fairly new. So we don't have that pressure to kind of maintain our brand voice over a long period of time.
I imagine you have a different challenge
I would
in the
say,
sense that you've more recently turned on the commercial tap, where you're now trying to sell a service in part. It's not the whole mandate, but you're probably one of the strongest advocates for doing what I believe to be the harder thing, which is exceptional content marketing that will provide that long-term value. How are you finding that balance now, maybe between the pull of the commercial teams that you work with that are wanting to get more leads, etc.?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely like a strategy shift when that happens, right? And I think in the early days, it was quite not always easy, right? Almost like a simple strategy, which was let's make as much noise and increase the top of the funnel as much as possible, and do it by any means possible. And obviously, we had an idea of what our brand needed to be like, and we focused on educational content. We had like a strategy, but it was kind of a bit more easier to experiment. And now that we're focused on like how do we actually increase the quality of people who are coming through, it does need a slightly different way of thinking about it. But to be honest, I still think the fundamentals are exactly the same. And one thing I've learned is that great content marketing that increases reach will also increase further down the funnel metrics at that kind of scale. And so I wouldn't say the strategy has changed heavily, but what has helped, I would say, is probably my presence throughout the whole kind of life cycle of the company has been really helpful, so that I've been able to carry our strategy in the early days, which has just been education. Let's just give value. Let's teach people how to use our tools. And I think that's been our motto has been give away value for free and expect nothing in return. And we've been able to maintain that throughout the history of the business. What you often see in, particularly tech companies, when they kind of, their account gets quite big and they start to get a bit of an audience, they tend to revert to just posting like company announcements or product updates. And all of a sudden their feed becomes almost like a press release, just a kind of play-by-play press release. It becomes very black and white, and they get probably a drip feed of traffic from it, and it kind of ticks a box. What we've been able to maintain is, we're almost building like mini media companies. We want to become a resource for education, and I think it's helped that we've had that throughout the whole lifestyle cycle of the company. Yeah. It's kind of embedded into our culture.
Yeah, I love that. That's super practical advice. Just go be part of a founding team and you'll have no problems. No, but there is
No.
merit around. I'm
No,
being facetious.
No, you're right. You're right. You're right. But I'd say that the tip is like, don't lose sight that you're trying to give value to your followers. You're not just trying to give them a feed of company updates and links and, you know, happy hour RSVPs, like all that stuff that people actually don't really want to interact with. They want to consume content. They want to be educated.
Yeah. I think the important thing has been, like, really, to your point, you used the word education. You've taken other stakeholders, developers, product managers, sales teams through your way of thinking. So I think if you're in any organization, be intentional with your goals. So here we're trying to build a brand, a reputation that will serve all our marketing and sales objectives, but it will take time. The managing expectations part, it will take time, being very clear. And also, I suppose, then how you communicate that internally is integral. And don't be afraid to champion your wins. I think that's a really big thing that we sometimes, because we work on so many different projects, one of the things I ask our client servicing teams to do is go celebrate when we have a win. Because we will face enough heat if we recommend marketing that doesn't work or if we fall short. But when we do get a win, shout it from the goddamn rooftops. Because your job, in many respects, our job is to make the teams we work with look great. So when we do, give them the tools to look great. We talked a lot about creative this session, dude. I was reading an article and it was talking about the creative process from concept through to execution. And one of the elements that is often overlooked is placement. So think of the paradigms of a piece of out-of-home advertising. You have what you say, you have what you show, and then the bigger part is the context in which it's shown, the placement. And we will celebrate very smart advertising where the environment elevates the concept or the idea or the copy or whatever that is. But what I don't think enough designers do is then place that against other brands. I think about this a lot on the subway. If I'm on the subway or the tube, I'll see ad after ad after ad, and I'll analyze them, and 90% of them are shit. And I'll look through and say, what would I have done differently? Why is that effective if it was effective? And I actually think one of the things all marketing teams should do before they execute a creative out in the wild, particularly out of home, is see how it looks. Does your ad stand out next to other competitors, other random things? Are there, I suppose, creative factors that a lot of people overlook, like context and placement? Are there other things that you pay attention to when you're creating? And this can be in any campaign-based marketing.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And you see it a lot with out of home where there's just like a bunch of text, for example. The text is really small and it's barely legible. A, it's difficult to literally see it, but B, who's going to stop for 10 minutes on the commute to read this? And I think, like you said, the context of the creative is super important. I see it a lot in social creative as well, where whenever we create a piece of social content, we'll do like the mobile phone test, where I'll actually stand like a few feet back from my laptop when I'm looking at the asset and ask, like, can I read this? Can I understand it? Is it legible? Like, does it like click for me what I'm looking at? A lot of the time it isn't, and people are expecting people to, stare at their phones and try and like take in everything. And you should just assume that people have about a fraction of the time, or are going to put about a fraction of the effort into consuming that piece of content as you think they are. And usually you can cut your creative back to its bare bones. You can get to the point 10 times quicker. I think, I spend a lot of time giving feedback on videos, and I'd say the number one piece of feedback every time is like, this needs to be a minute shorter. It needs to be 30 seconds shorter. We need to get to the point 10 times quicker. Like, nobody cares. Nobody's going to watch this. And so, yeah, the context, like you said, is super important, but also the context of any user you're trying to reach now is changing every day. It's changing wildly, and people have less time. They have less our attention spans are being completely wiped clean by TikTok. So you've got to usually distill your kind of creative to its like core messaging and get to the point much faster.
And what's your process for that then? Are you just going? Are you brutal with cuts and reiterations, and like you almost go? You try and I suppose you're trying to distill everything down to its most simple form. Is that the plan, or its most direct?
So like a lot of times it's we'll start with a long draft of something, and then it will just get cut mercilessly, and it might involve a lot of recuts. I think it's just not being too precious about the video that you're producing, for example. And what you learn is you get better over time. So like I remember some of our early kind of big videos that we pushed having like 13 or 14 different cuts, because it just like we just need it had to keep going through feedback. We'd show it to people as well and ask like, do you get this? Like, do you understand what's happening here? And just really like the number one question I ask is like, would anyone care about this? Would I care about this? Would I engage with this? Like, is this something that I would stop and send someone? Like, if not, let's get to that. Let's get to that state. And so, not seeing it as a bad thing if you're on version number 15 is really important. Like, that's not a negative. It's not a bad thing if you've gone through 15 kind of different versions. It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong or bad. You're just really, really querying the quality of the creative, because the impact that you're going to have if it is refined in that way is going to be 10 times better than if you went with an early version.
Yeah, I love all of that. I think the phone test is a really good one. How legible is this? I fall victim of this all the time. As marketeers, we kind of often over-romanticize things. And I was looking through our website the other day, and the opening paragraph was more the context of why we exist, and it laid the foundation for the world. And I just thought, remove my own bias. We are a marketing and communication company. Let's just say that to start with. Right, I'm just going to rewrite this. So I went on the back end and just changed our website without telling anyone. But yeah, I think that point around distilling down to its simplest form, doing the test, and also something that you said there is speak to people that don't have context. Assume no one cares. Yeah. I really like the blind test of going to someone. You haven't given them a brief. They haven't worked on the project. Do you understand this? And do you know what to take from it? And if they get that, you're onto something. And I think it led us to a bigger point around people mistake or conflate the idea that you should be testing lots of things. And they conflate the idea that you have a high bar on reactive content. You're constantly reiterating to get to the right answer, with the fact that you can still do all of those things, and the end outcome is you're just focused on delivering the best possible result, and you're doing effective marketing. And I'll give you an example. What I mean by that is, if we know in a predominantly social media dominated world, the biggest factors that will determine your success on your content is the hook, the headline, the title, the framing, the thumbnail, all of these factors. And by getting to a point where you distill them down to their most effective form, the difference between a win and a loss is so significant. We're not talking by we can make this 10% better. In many cases, through content marketing, it's the difference between making it 100x better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like, you might do this 10 times, and 9 times it's marginally better. But that one time it bangs, you get that kind of moonshot 10x return.
Yeah.
Okay, my man. To conclude, I want you to get vulnerable with me. We're going to do therapy. Tell me about a marketing mistake you've made very recently. Very recently. Give me your confession. Go.
So a couple of weeks ago, I just went through and scheduled a bunch of content on our Instagram Reels. right? And so like we just started getting some good traction on Instagram. We're getting like views, and we've had this 9x16 content that we produce for YouTube Shorts and for TikTok for months, and only now have I put it onto Reels. And it was just this kind of moment where I thought, that's such low hanging fruit, right? Like the ability to just repackage that content. I've always assumed that because other competitors in our space, no one does Instagram, right? There's no, and I couldn't find any evidence for our audience being on Instagram. And that is immediately a mistake, right? The way you find out is by posting and by doing it yourself. And we've now started to get like 2,000 or 3,000 views on these reels. I'm not sure. I actually don't know the answer yet. So I don't think this is a mistake yet. But what I do know is it was this kind of realization that we just need to try everything right. And I'm only going to know the answer by posting. You shouldn't be relying on research. You shouldn't be, relying on gut feeling. Yeah. And especially when you have like 9x16, that ability to repurpose content, just throw everything up there and see what sticks. You never know. Like, one of the videos got like 6,000-7,000 views. That's 6,000 or 7,000 views that we wouldn't have had. And so that is my one sin, I think, for this year. It's not doing that sooner.
You've fallen into a dangerous trap there as well as looking for validation from the industry. Outlier successes aren't going to lie with those that are already doing the things that are written in the rule book that everybody else is doing. And actually, it's one of my biggest bugbears in marketing, when marketing teams just wait for their competitors to have done that thing and validated it and proven it works, etc., etc. So, and if I remember rightly, when we were going through our New Year's resolutions, one of yours was to leverage already created content. Create it once, sell it many times. That was a catty mission, and you haven't lived up to that mission.
Oh, I have. I've done it.
Redemption. I said a sin. This was a redemption story. I will give you my sin of the week. So we started working with a new company, and it's there are clients we work with that pay the bills, and there are clients that we work with because it's exciting and it's interesting work. And this falls into the latter camp. It's exciting. It's a project we wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And we pitched a tissue concept as part of our introduction to us as an agency. And one of these tissue concepts they really liked, and it wasn't actually supposed to be, we didn't fully flesh it out. And then we had a very short timeline to turn it around. So speaking very candidly, we took on the project, we delivered the work, and it had an amazing story in this concept, and it's actually quite nuanced. In principle, the execution was simple, but the story and where it lived and the distribution plan had to be very considered to make this work. And we did this at a loss. Like, we literally lost money on running this project because it should, if delivered, will create a great case study. And it's a bit of a break bread project with a cool set of people and a cool brand. And my sin or mistake was, I actually reflect on that moment and go, we haven't left ourselves enough room to really do that project justice. We haven't had enough room in the budget or enough time to make sure that we can pull all the levers to set it up for ultimate success. And I actually think we probably shouldn't have rushed that as our kind of first introduction to this team. Because it's not that we did anything wrong, but it had potential to be great. And I don't think we've delivered something that was great. So there's part of me goes, we should have just said no. But anyway, you live and you learn.
You can't remake a first impression.
Poetic. I feel like we should conclude there, dude. You can't remake a first impression. Or you can with AI. I will disagree with you.
There you go.
In generative AI, anything is possible. Dude, as always, great to chat. My guy, can you see this? Is this in frame?
I can see it now, yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
No, it wasn't in frame the whole time.
Fuck, should have had that in frame. We live and we learn. We will make another first impression. Good to see you, dude. Until next week.
See you later.